The digestive system, or known as the gastrointestinal system or GI tract, is really how your body gets all of the nutrients, all the liquids into your system naturally. Now, the reason I'm saying naturally is because, yes, there's intravenous needles for IVs for putting saline bags in, or there's feeding tubes to get food into the stomach or intestines. But the idea is, naturally, without medical intervention, this is the system that gets every nutrient into your bodies. So let's start looking at the two main kind of divisions or breakdowns of the digestive system. You're going to have the alimentary canal to start with. Now, the alimentary canal is going to be the tube where all the food and liquid passes through. It's one continuous tube from mouth right through to the end, the anus. There is no set break point, it doesn't separate out. You can have a solid object go in one end and just follow all the way through to the other end. So you start off with the mouth. The mouth is how you're obviously ingesting, how you're getting food, liquids into the system. Then head back into the pharynx. Now the pharynx is going to be the back side over here of your mouth. Now it's kind of think of it as the top of the throat. So if you're looking straight back in your mouth, that's where the pharynx is, or at least part of the pharynx, the oropharynx. You then have the esophagus. The esophagus is going to be the muscular tube running from the pharynx down towards your stomach. The stomach itself is going to be a muscular sac that's meant to kind of mix and churn the food. And we'll get into all of these a lot more later. This is the basic idea we're looking at. Then you have the small intestines. Small intestines is broken up into three different regions. Duodenum, then you have the jejunum, and the ileum. Now, make sure I notice this and make sure I mention it a few more times, but ileum, watch the spelling. I-L-E-U-M, not I-L-I-U-M. Think, well, hold on, why does it make a difference? Think back to AP1, we're talking about the bones. There is the ileum region of the coxal bone, I-L-I-U-M. So if it's an I-L-I-U-M, that's part of the bone. I-L-E, E for eating, I-L-E-U-M is going to be part of the small intestines. Now, for the large intestines, we have a couple different pieces and parts here to come together. We start with the cecum. Now, the cecum is just this little area right here. Kind of think of it as the start of the actual large intestines. Then you have the ascending colon. Ascending is traveling up. You have the transverse colon going across. You have the descending colon heading down. Names make sense. Ascending, transverse, descending. That goes into the sigmoid colon. Now, the sigmoid colon is going to end up leading into the rectum and the anal canal, eventually exiting out the anus. That is the entire alimentary canal, from mouth through anus. One continuous tube. Which means the inside of the alimentary canal is actually outside of your body. Because there is no membranes to cross, no structures go through, it simply was one continuous tube going through. So kind of a weird thing to think about, but the inside of the alimentary canal is the outside of your body. You put food in, waste product comes out, it's basically what you couldn't use of the food. It doesn't cross the membrane, doesn't enter into your cells, just stays inside that tube. All right, other division, the accessory organs. Now, the accessory organs are going to be things that help out with digestion, but food doesn't actually go through these organs. We'll start with the tongue. Your tongue, it moves things around inside your mouth, but the food doesn't pass through the tongue. You have the salivary glands. All these salivary glands, from parotid to sublingual to submandibular. And there's more than that. There's other tiny ones scattered throughout, but those are the main three. They all, again, secrete saliva. Food's not going through them, but the saliva helps mixing up in the oral cavity and then helps with passage down the pharynx and esophagus. You have the liver. Liver is secreting enzymes. It's producing bile, all helping with digestion. You have the gallbladder. Gallbladder is going to accept, store, concentrate the bile, and then secrete it. Again, food's not traveling through it. You then have your spleen. Again, food's not traveling through it. The spleen's helping with extra blood cells and just helps with emergency aspects there. You have the pancreas. Again, food's not traveling through. The pancreas is mixing up the pancreatic juices, a mixture of different enzymes that help with digestion. And then you have your appendix. Now the appendix itself, you can argue if it helps digestion or not. It's more of an immune functionality. But again, food's not really meant to go through it very much. So different parts of the accessory organs, and before that, the alimentary canal. So looking at the histology. Now the entire alimentary canal from the mouth to the anus is made up of 4 primary layers. Now these 4 tunics might vary a little bit depending on where you are in the tract, but the same basic orientation. You start with the mucosa. Mucosa is the most internal layering. It's what's just around the lumen. Now here you'll notice in the mucosa, once you go from the lumen, the open space, outward, you'll have a thin layer of epithelium. This epithelium will change depending on where you're located. For example, in the oral cavity, that epithelium is stratified squamous. But down, for example, in the stomach, it's simple columnar. So depending on where you are, could have different types of epithelial tissues. Beyond the epithelial tissue, we have this lamina propria, we have the muscularis mucosae. We'll get to those more in a second or two. You then have the next layer out around that is the submucosa. Submucosa, you can see the submucosal glands are in here. We then go outwards to the muscularis externa. Muscularis externa has 2 layers, circular and longitudinal. All depends on the direction of the fibers. And the outside itself is the serosa. Now, that term serosa is the majority of the GI tract or digestive tract, but it's not all of it, because the serosa has to be inferior to the diaphragm, which means the esophagus, the pharynx don't have a serosa, and we'll explain more about that in a second. So what is the function of the mucosa, this first layer? Well, first off, the big thing is we're secreting mucus. Mucus is going to help the chewed up food particles travel and slide down through the tubing, prevent things from getting stuck and clotted. So you want to make sure it's free movement going down this entire pathway. You can have digestive enzymes, you can have hormones. That depends on location inside the digestive tract though. Because sometimes some areas have these, stomach, small intestines. Other areas like the esophagus don't. So it's location dependent. These are some of the functions. Absorption. Well, you need to absorb the nutrients. Absorption is looking more at small intestines and a little bit at large intestines. But things like the stomach, the esophagus, the pharynx, they're not absorbing. And then protection against infectious disease. In the lymphatic and immune chapters, we talked about the idea of MALT, mucosal associated lymphatic tissue. Well, again, that's what's helping prevent against disease. These membranes are trying to prevent any bacteria or viruses or particles that you eat that shouldn't be inside your body from getting in. The membranes are selecting what's passing through and what's not. So we mentioned the epithelium before already, and it has different tissues depending on location. Well, I'm putting down here simple columnar epithelium. That is the majority of the tissue found throughout this layering. That's found all the way through from almost the anus. The anus is going to be mostly stratified squamous, but all the way back up the large intestine, small intestine, the stomach. It's going back up, and then you hit the esophagus. Now we're also starting to change over. Esophagus is stratified squamous. There's more friction, more abrasion because of the food you're swallowing. So we have 2 main tissue types. Simple columnar is the most common. Already mentioned mucus. Well, simple columnar secretes mucus. So we're secreting the mucus from the goblet cells. That mucus is going to help with the movement through the tract. Help us to ease the food passage. Because the food you eat isn't always very moist. Sometimes you're eating things like crackers or pretzels. Your body has to add the moisture in to make sure those particles can slide through the tract without causing damage or getting stuck. And we mentioned the idea of enzymes and hormones. Depending on the location, like stomach and intestines, you could be secreting these. Other locations, like the esophagus and the pharynx, are not. Then we have the lamina propria. Remember, lamina propria is just around the actual epithelial tissue. It's going to be loose areolar connective tissue. It's meant to support the epithelial tissue. Now, there's capillaries found in this lamina propria. It's meant for nourishing the tissue, both the lamina propria and the actual epithelial tissue, but it's also meant for absorption of the nutrients. So you're absorbing all the end products, things that you've already broken down. So those 4 main macromolecules, plus your minerals, plus your trace minerals, plus the water, plus everything is getting absorbed into the system. And we already mentioned the lymphoid follicles, that MALT, mucosal associated lymphatic tissue. So if you're not remembering that, refresh back to the lymphatics immunity chapter. Muscularis mucosae. Now this is different than the actual muscularis externa layer. This is muscularis mucosae, is going to be a muscular layer inside the mucus, actually. So inside the mucosa. So we're inside this mucosal layer having small little movements here. It's not meant for the big, huge movements like peristalsis or segmentation, really. This is meant for just small little controlling. Just a little bit here, a little bit there. Just helps with subtle exchanges and subtle movements inside the tract. So this is more localized aspects, the muscularis mucosae. All right, next tunic is the submucosa. So you went through the mucosa. Now the submucosa is the next layer around that. We're going towards the outside, away from the lumen. You'll notice there is blood, there is lymphatic vessels here. Those are all, again, meant for absorption. You're absorbing all the nutrients, but in the case of blood, you're also nourishing in this case. So in the submucosa here. Muscularis externa. Now in this case, this is the 3rd tunic out. So we went from mucosa, went to the submucosa, now muscularis externa. Remember, this one is different than the muscularis mucosae. The muscularis externa has both the inner circular and the outer longitudinal layers. Inner circular is going to wrap around the lumen. The outer longitudinal, the fibers run the length of the lumen. So it goes parallel to the lumen. And each one's going to have their own purpose. That inner circular layer is meant to constrict. So we're helping with making the areas smaller. While the outer longitudinal layers will cause the tube to get shorter. So kind of bring the entire tube a little bit shorter, look together. But basically, these are how you're moving things through your entire alimentary canal. You have this myenteric nerve plexus found here. The myenteric nerve plexus is giving constant feedback to your, not only your GI tract, but also your central nervous system. And that's helping to control when your GI tract is moving. Are you going through segmentation or peristalsis? The 2 main ways you're mixing up food and then moving it through the entire GI tract. But there are also some things called sphincters throughout here. Now, it's not every single spot, but there's only certain areas that'll have a sphincter. A sphincter is going to be a circular muscle that constricts to close down the tube. You're going to have sphincters, for example, at the beginning of your stomach, end of your esophagus, preventing backflow. You have a sphincter then at the end of your stomach, before the small intestines, controlling how much goes into the small intestines. So these sphincters are meant to help with control mechanisms inside your GI tract. All right, here is peristalsis. Way peristalsis works is the tube squeezes and then just keeps squeezing right down the entire length. So it takes that bolus of food and just keeps propelling it down. So it pushes it further and further down. It's the same chunk of food, the same bolus, just gets pushed along. Think about if you had a tube and a marble. You kind of pinch that tube and just squeeze it along the line. So just squeezing down, you're moving that marble away. That's peristalsis. Segmentation is more meant for mixing. Notice there's blue and yellow here. But then as you segment, you're going to end up squeezing and pinching in between each one of these. So when you do that, you'll notice that then each one mixes the 2 compartments together. The whole purpose here is to mix all the food, mix all the enzymes, mix the mucus. And it keeps doing this, squeezing one part, next part, mix, 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 until hopefully you get a nice homogeneous mixture, nice even mixture of everything. That way all the enzymes have a chance to work, you have bile mixed in there, you're going to have all your liquids, your solids, it's all mixed together. So that's segmentation. And then the outside is the serosa. Serosa is the visceral peritoneum for almost the entire tract. The reason I say that is because when you get to the esophagus, you end up with the fibrous adventitia. Because remember, the esophagus is above or superior to the diaphragm. The esophagus, then, that is superior to the diaphragm is fibrous adventitia. But an interesting fact, there is some esophagus below the diaphragm that is serosa. It's the only organ that has both serosa and fibrous adventitia. All depends on if you're above or below the diaphragm. Now, if you're retroperitoneal, so that's behind this cavity, you can have both adventitia and serosa. So that'd be things more like kidneys, for example. So if it's retroperitoneal and there are some other things in there, they'll have both the adventitia and serosa. So again, that's the histology. From the lumen in the center, you go mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and then serosa or fibrous adventitia on the outside for the 4 tunics. And that's the basic idea of the histology of the GI tract or your digestive system.